Shabbat Shalom. There are times in our lives when we are caught up in moments of passion or excitement. We may have just gotten a raise and decided to go out for a fancy meal. We may have just won the baseball championship and poured an entire icy water canister on the coach's head. Tried to make that a relevant local reference. I have no sense of that. We may have been moved by a play and now want to immerse ourselves in every play that the playwright has written. And we all know these experiences of powerful exuberance, and we all accept them and even welcome them as exciting moments in our lives. However, the other side of that coin is when our intentions and our excitement cross a line, when they cross a boundary, when our excitement and our intentions push the line of appropriateness, when our passion becomes zealousness. In this week's Parsha, Shmini addresses this very issue of what happens when leaders overstep the boundaries of their power or of their mission. Our story begins with Moshe relaying to the priests, the family of Aaron, what their roles and their duties as priests will be. For 7 days, they learn and prepare to serve God in the Mishkan, in the tabernacle. They learn about the different offerings, the clothes that they are to wear, and so on. And on the 8th day, they were anointed priests and to begin their work. End of story, right? But not so fast. The Torah tells us then, now Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, each took his fire pan and put fire in it and laid incense on it, and they offered before the Lord alien fire, which he had not enjoined upon them. And the fire came forth from the Lord and consumed them. Thus they died at the instance of the Lord. On the 8th day, each one made an unwelcome offering to God and were immediately killed by God. What did they do that was so wrong that God killed them? The Midrashim, the rabbinic interpretations of the Torah, tried to fill all sorts of creative reasons for why their passion and their zealousness were means for their deaths. In a 6th century rabbinic text, the rabbis argue, were they killed by God for crossing the religious boundaries of the ritual structure that they had received, or were they killed for crossing the spiritual boundaries of trying to come too close to God? Were they punished for overstepping the bounds of their family structure, for not listening to their father Aaron and letting him take leadership? And why, in the first place, do their intentions matter in terms of how they came to praise God? Another take on the story of Nadav and Avihu is that perhaps they weren't zealous at all. Perhaps they were just practicing their own internal religious autonomy and were taken by the moment and the power of God. I think that we can all relate to these moments. They wanted to innovate. Does that resonate here in our community, in the New Reformed Temple, emphasis on the word new? A congregation which celebrates religious autonomy? Does that resonate amongst us non-Orthodox, non-Jewish law-based Jews that sometimes we do what we want to because we believe that that is what suits our religious persuasion, and that's what aligns with our secular values? For a moment, let us ignore the fact that ancient Israel did not affirm autonomy. The Israelites were called upon to conform to the religious standards dictated by God and Moses. Things were not open to change and innovation. In an essay by the modern and Orthodox Dutch Israeli philosopher Rabbi Nathan Lopez Cardozo, he writes, one of the most discussed issues in today's world of religious thought is the question of human autonomy versus man's obligation to carry out God's command. Which is a higher religious value, to serve God in a spontaneous outpouring religious devotion, autonomy, or to obey the divine imperative, obedience? And I want to turn his eloquently articulated question back to us and alter his charge. What is more important to us? Our autonomy, our ability to choose, or being part of a religious communal system which is bound by religious authority? Meaning, do we make our choices as Reformed Jews in order to please our minds and our souls? Or do we make decisions as Reformed Jews concerned about the perpetuation of the entire Jewish people? Do we worry that the changes that we make will distance ourselves from other Jews who are more traditional? In Israel, this is a discussion that exists in the headlines. I am a card-carrying member of the Reform movement. I raised my kids in a Reform synagogue in Tel Aviv. I was ordained by Reform Seminary in Israel, and I've worked as a religious leader in Reform Synagogue in Israel as well. I grew up in a conservative Jewish household, but chose a more liberal path, which I think runs in the family. But I personally worry about making too many changes which may fracture the Jewish people. Personally, I want my freedom, but I worry that my need to exercise my autonomy will disconnect me from other Jews and from Jewish tradition that has been passed down to me. So let me give you a specific example. I was raised to observe Shabbat. I love Shabbat. It is the center of my life in so many ways. I need Shabbat, and I want my children to love Shabbat. When Shabbat comes in Israel, you can feel it. Everything slows down. You can hear the sirens of Shabbat. You can smell the chicken soup of different varieties in every corner. But I do not observe Shabbat the way that my Orthodox neighbors do. I go to the beach and I drive my car and I use lights, but I also do not use my cell phone or cook. But I do use my microwave to reheat things. And I go to synagogue as a woman rabbi and I lead services, preach, and read from the Torah. But my Judaism is a mixture of tradition and change. I exercise my autonomy, and that feels good. But I ask myself, do my choices disconnect me from Jews who are less liberal? Am I using my autonomy appropriately, or am I endangering Judaism? I guess that I want my religious cake and to eat it too, preferably babka. And what is of most concern, am I living the Jewish life? Then I can explain to my children. You can ask them later. That will create in them a love of Judaism. Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, were they dealing with these big questions too? I suspect, as does the commentary on this text, that they were overzealous. But for all intents and purposes, for this sermon and for this discussion, the sons of Aaron seem to have my challenge. They want tradition. And after all, they are priests who were called upon to carry out the sacrifices. They also wanted to bring excitement and a heartfelt love to their task and to their devotion. It is hard to be a Jew. It is especially hard to be a Jew who loves tradition and also loves being a modern person who seeks a Judaism that honors autonomy. But in the end, I believe in a Judaism that calls upon us to struggle and to think, that is only the kind of Judaism that is worth living, asking the questions all the time, contradicting ourselves too. That is my path. It is a hard one, so